It's a wonderful day in the homiehood, a wonderful day for a homie. Won't you be my homie to Taro? What's up? My name is Danny Taro, and we're about to run down this Canadian news, the Canadian headlines for today, which is February 16th. Oh my God, Valentine's Day is already a thing of the past, and we're gonna jump into these headlines for this morning. There's a lot of drama happening, and we're gonna definitely talk about Doug Ford and John Tory towards the end of this segment. So if you really want to know, you can skip ahead. But first, we're gonna talk about Pablo Neruda, who's probably a name you haven't heard in a while, unless you're an avid fan of poetry. Um, but people are saying, forensic scientists are saying that the Chilean poet uh, died with toxic bacteria in his body. Many people have suspected that um, Pablo Neruda was the victim of an assassination and not actually someone who died of cancer. So the Nobel laureate and diplomat was poisoned soon after a military coup toppled Chile's government in 1973. Now, these are allegations. This is not confirmed, but it's this new information is like highly suspicious. So they're saying they found this bacterium in his one of his teeth and bone fragments, and it's one of the most dangerous pathogens known. And born in 1904, Mr. Neruda was internationally celebrated for his literary works, of course, including 20 love poems and A Song of Despair, first published in 1924, a prominent left-wing intellectual and avowed communist. So actually, I didn't know this about Pablo Neruda. I didn't know that he was a communist. So interesting. I feel like now maybe I need to read up on his work a bit more. He served as Chile's ambassador to France from 1970 to 1972 during the government of President Salvador Allende. He died on September 23rd, 1973, just 12 days after the US backed coup that swept Mr. Allende from power, and hours after he returned home from a clinic where he suspected that he had been injected with something. So, I mean, this sounds like very, very suspicious, right? However, in the forensic science magic that they were doing, they said the result was not enough on its own to confirm that Mr. Ruda had been killed by the bacterium, but they are looking at people who were other people who were victims of this military coup, and he's not the only one who was poisoned. And if they could cross-reference this bacterium with those other prisoners, they could potentially conclude, like, that would be pretty wild coincidence, right? So they could potentially conclude that he was the victim of this military overtaking. So really kind of interesting new news. Maid eligibility. If you don't know, maid in Canada is the wait, what is it called? It's the assisted in dying. Maid. What is it? It's something assisted in dying. Medical assistance in dying. Okay. I really should know that by now, but now we all know. Maid eligibility should expand to minors, comma patients with mental illness. Report recommends. So this MAID program has been obviously super controversial since its inception. This to me sounds like, like, why don't we make it even more controversial and expand it to minors and patients with mental illness? Recently, they have decided to wait another year before they decide to expand it to people with mental illness. So I mean, that seemed like a good thing. And now they're maybe suggesting to expand it to minors, which I don't know how I really feel about. From a philosophical standpoint, I think I agree with euthanasia and assisted dying, and I believe in bodily autonomy. However, in the confines of society as we know it, where we know that we push people to into poverty, we push people into mental health problems, and we don't offer them the proper supports. We don't have universal mental health care here in Canada. Given all of these situations, I kind of just don't believe in assisted dying in because we don't have the proper measures in place to ensure that people will not fall through the cracks and choose assisted dying when there are other potential ways to solve their problems. So this is something that is going to be ongoing uh, with the debate. So Senator Pamela Wallin here is saying that MAID is always a matter of choice, noting that in surveys, Canadians have expressed strong support for advanced requests. Let's hope the government now acts quickly to answer the needs of Canadians. So some people are raising concerns. Psychiatrists are saying patients who could recover might instead choose assisted death. Palliative care doctors are saying that there's a complexity of giving assisted death to seniors with dementia who can no longer consent. And other experts are saying that, what this is actually a matter of people's bodily autonomy and their individual right to choose. So we should respect the patient's autonomy. So it is an interesting philosophical question. I'm glad there's been no kind of like rush on this yet. There were some stories trending where people who were in poverty and had minor, not minor, but like very, they weren't dying, but they were at risk of being unhoused, and their doctor, as a way for them to maybe more ethically choose the end of their life instead of dying on the streets, their doctor suggested maybe they could have MAID instead. So that was a trendy story when it was going on, and it raised a lot of concerns about this program. So currently, all cases must consent on the day they receive it. So if you have dementia and say, hey, if my dementia gets worse, I would like you to, unplug the defibrillator or whatever, like end it. You can't really do that in the current system. So they're potentially thinking about changing that so that people with mental health issues can choose death ahead of time. So so far, this has been something that the vast majority of people who have received are terminal patients with cancer or heart disease. The average age of Canadians who receive assisted death is 76 years old, according to Health Canada. So in other news, Brenda Lucky is leaving her post as RCMP commissioner. For reasons cited here: poor communication skills, mishandling of major files, such as the Nova Scotia mass shooting, systemic racism within the force, and the use of the Emergencies Act to end last year's anti-vaccine mandate protests in Ottawa. So it sounds like it's been quite a tumultuous ride for Brenda Lucky here. During her testimony during the inquiry into the Emergencies Act, she forgot like key meetings. She referred to her notes that she had made going into the meetings, and in some cases, those were not things that she actually brought up during the meeting. So she was kind of embroiled in that controversy. Not really that big a deal, in my opinion. The thing that stands out to me is that she didn't know what systemic racism was. So when it was first brought up to her, and she was asked if systemic racism exists within the RCMP, at first she disputed the notion that systemic racism exists in her organizations and said she was unsure what that expression even means. Days later, she abruptly changed course, acknowledging that systemic racism is part of every institution, the RCMP included. Like, I would say, especially the RCMP. So in 2020, an independent report by former Supreme Court Justice Michael Bastriak found a toxic culture within the force that tolerated misogynistic and homophobic attitudes. Sounds like par for the course for police. So, and conservative public safety critic Raquel Dancho is also calling for the resignation of Minister Bill Blair. My guess is from the conservative standpoint, they are saying it's over probably the Emergency Act committee, because I assume that they're more aligned with the anti-vax crowd. So again, what really stands out to me is like addressing the failure to address systemic racism, which also included racism towards Indigenous people. I think under Brenda Lucky's position here, I think 6 Indigenous people were killed by police officers in Winnipeg, New Brunswick, and Nunavut in just 3 months at the hands of Mounties using excessive force against Indigenous people. And, this is someone who, again, didn't even know the word systemic racism or what it meant until it was too late. So, pretty ridiculous. Quebec National Assembly passes unanimous motion criticizing Bill C11 and is demanding an 11th hour change. Bill C11 is the Streaming Act. So it's planning to change a lot of stuff about like platforms like Netflix and Spotify and YouTube. Quebec all of a sudden is up in arms, and this is coming as a shock to people who have been part of the legislation, because so far members of Quebec's cultural sector have been enthusiastic backers of the bill. So I don't know what Quebec is doing. It seems like more of just Quebec being Quebec. Like they had a lot of time, like I think 3 years, to raise any concerns, and now they are saying that as a nation, it is up to Quebec itself to define its cultural direction. And it reminds Parliament that the distinct linguistic character of Quebec needs to be respected. Honestly, I don't even know what they're complaining about, but this is something that is probably maybe going to hold up Bill C11, which has already been passed through the Commons and the Senate after a prolonged examination in the Senate committee. So I mean, it sounds like it's going to be a little bit longer. Okay, moving on to Ontario, which is the big thing that has been on everybody's mind, well, at least here in Ontario. Ford defends Stag and Doe party with a $150 admission fee, calling questions ridiculous. So this is something we've already talked about on stream, but I thought it's worth pointing out once more here in these segments. Mr. Ford's daughter had a party, and some wealthy developers, some who are involved with the very suspicious development of the Greenbelt, were in attendance. This line really stands out to me. Mr. Ford said the boys took care of the event, adding that the place was packed full of police officers, given that 3 of his 4 daughters are in relationships with officers. 3 of his 4 daughters, which is just that's gross. A spokeswoman for Mr. Ford later said the boys was a reference to the premier's daughter's then fiance, who is a policeman, and his friends. So, I mean, honestly, the way things are going in Toronto and Ontario, it really just seems like it's a relationship. Like the government is quite literally in bed with the police, and we'll get to a little more about what happened in Toronto in a moment. So, Mr. Wake, who is the integrity commissioner, has concluded based on information provided by the premier and his staff. So again, this is not information that has been part of an investigation, just information that Doug Ford basically provided himself, that there was nothing to indicate non-compliance with the Members' Integrity Act, which bans MPPs from receiving gifts or fees related to their duties as an MPP. So again, this doesn't even really matter. It's like, oh, well, Doug Ford said he did nothing wrong, and I believe him. Okay. Good news, I guess, is that the NDP is preparing a complaint to the Integrity Commissioner about the Stag and Doe party and wedding. So maybe we'll see some movement on this. Maybe we'll see some accountability for Doug Ford, but I somehow, I'm not holding my breath on that. Now, good news, everyone. Toronto Mayor John Tory submits formal resignation despite Ford others urging him to stay. So he has finally submitted his resignation. This must have come out so late last night it wasn't in the physical newspaper, but I did catch it here on the site. So he submitted his resignation about an hour after the budget meeting concluded last night. That's the Toronto City Council budget meeting. And he will quit effectively 5 p.m. on Friday. So, it took him a whole week to get out the door, but it sounds like he's finally going to be gone. And then so this is a time when Doug Ford obviously came out in support of John Tory, saying it's not the time for change. Everything is going tickety-boo in Toronto, which if you have been watching the news at all, it's not going tickety-boo. It's actually quite a mess in Toronto, and I'm feeling really, really bad for all the folks who are going to be affected by this. Is he the best thing that we have in Toronto? I love how he asked this rhetorical question, and then he says yes. Like when you ask a question like this, usually you say no. Is he the best thing that we have in Toronto? No. But is the like but you know, but then he would say like, but is it the best thing we have like right now? But is it better than the alternative? Yes. You know, like but he's like, is it the best thing we have in Toronto? Yes. It is the best thing. It's the best thing. Toronto's doing great. Everything's going tickety boo. It's like, okay, what the hell are you talking about? So, you know, a lot of Tory's closest allies as well, some of the councillors, including Francis Nunziata and Councillor Brad Bradford, who has been touted as a possible candidate to replace Mr. Tory, were saying that the mayor should stay. So luckily, they're not getting their wishes. A lot of controversy has been over whether John Tory should be allowed to preside over this budget meeting, over this budget, if he's not going to continue on as mayor. So some people who are probably more political experts than me are saying that this is completely like illegitimate, and in any other level of government this would simply just be not allowed. However, it's happening in Toronto. It's already happened, I guess. So, one thing people have been complained about as well is that he's doing this, but he's refusing to speak to any media about the situation before or seemingly like after. So, last night we were watching a little bit of this on stream. People were shouting, let me in, and John Tory resign. John Tory kind of just kept talking and raised his voice slightly. Others protesters chanted, "How's the homeless? Feed the poor." Kick John Tory out the door. At which point, city council went on a second recess, and it was delayed a couple hours before it was kind of like allowed to start. So luckily, John Tory, as far as we know, did not use any of the strong mayoral powers that he was recently granted. Just to give you some context here about what's going to happen after, now that the budget meeting has concluded and John Tory is stepping away. The interim leader falls to Councillor Jennifer McKelvey, who was named to the post of deputy mayor. And an election is expected to come between 4 and 5 months. So we'll be watching Toronto up until that point. When there's an election like this, I do like to have a special stream. So, you know, make sure you like and subscribe and follow us so that you don't miss it. A former lawyer and Rogers executive who became a broadcaster and a provincial PC leader, Mr. Tory won the mayoralty in 2014, promising to return dignity to an office sullied by the behavior of former Mayor Rob Ford. I guess so much for that. He promised repeatedly that he would serve only 2 terms, usually adding a joke to the effect that otherwise his longtime wife would kill him. However, last year he announced he would run again, saying he had the blessing of his spouse. I'm going to assume that when she gave her blessing, she didn't know about the affair that he was having with a staffer. So, you know, it's kind of ridiculous that we got a 3rd term of John Tory, and now, well, we're not getting a full 3rd term. And this is going to be something that costs Toronto. People are saying maybe $20 million to have another election. So, the spiciness from last night from the council meeting was that Councillor Alejandra Bravo introduced a motion calling for $900,000 of a proposed $48 million increase to the police budget to be redirected and support the homeless people. Possible mayoral possible mayoral candidate, Councillor Brad Bradford, rose to the challenge by asking her, "Does your motion propose to defund the police?" So this is actually such a ridiculous notion. First of all, as Ms. Bravo points out, it only amounts to 0.08 of the overall police budget. And this is $48 million increase that hasn't even been approved yet, or it was at least in discussions during this exact city council meeting. So it's not really defunding the police if you are preemptively reallocating the funds, and they couldn't even do this. They couldn't even get 0.08% of that police budget directed towards resources and support for homeless folks. So honestly, a failure of everything. Brad Bradford previously had positioned himself as a progressive mayor, someone who was a big supporter of the defund the police movement when it was trending in the wake of George Floyd's death, when it was trending big in Toronto. And now he's completely flipped the script, like just saying that it's this ridiculous notion to defund the police. So really disgusting behavior. And the other thing is oh yeah, that the police, they have like a $3 million podcast or something like that. Like all of this money is being directed towards the Toronto police so that they can have a podcast. And now we should go over this later on stream. Um where they can basically do like pro police propaganda. And not only that, but not everyone is allowed to listen to the podcast. It only has a limited scope, and the CBC had to file a freedom of information request just so that they could get a copy and listen to the podcast itself. So this is public money funding the police so they can have a pro propaganda podcast. And not only that, we're not even allowed to listen to it, or at least we have to do a whole bunch of legal work in order to do so. So absolutely ridiculous. Last thing for today is Canada is to provide $21 million for Ukraine demining efforts and humanitarian assistance. This is the ongoing campaign for Canada to give Ukraine a shit ton of resources. So this is coming out of Foreign Minister Melanie Joly announces $21 million for demining efforts and humanitarian causes, including assistance for the victims of sexual abuse. We're all in, she said Wednesday. And I mean, if you didn't know, now we know, I guess. Canada is all in their support for Ukraine, or their campaign. I think it's more of a campaign against Russia than it is support for Ukraine. Rupert here is saying we can't listen. Oh yeah, what a waste of money. The police said they needed the money to function. Yeah, absolutely ridiculous. But when it comes back to this situation in Ukraine, 7.5 million is going to the demining operations. So if you're unsure what demining is, it's the removal of landmines, and $14 million is going to various humanitarian and civil causes. So one thing that is kind of a point of interest here is that about a month ago, Human Rights Watch said that Ukraine has almost certainly used rockets to spread thousands of anti-personnel lines in around the eastern city of Izium, where it was occupied by Russian forces. So basically, this technology that we are now giving 21 millions, or sorry, like $7.5 million to disarm, Ukraine is also using that same technology. So we're basically helping Ukraine clean up its own shit, wipe its own ass, however you want to say it. Ukrainian forces appear to have extensively scattered landmines around the Izium area, causing civilian casualties and posing an ongoing risk, said Steve Goose, Human Rights Watch's Arms Division Director. Russian forces have repeatedly used anti-personnel mines and committed atrocities across the country, but this doesn't justify Ukrainian use of these prohibited weapons. So, a bit of a what the hell is going on here, Ukraine situation. But, we do know Canada, as Melanie Joly says, is all in. Okay, thank you so much for watching on YouTube. I am your homie, my homie, Tutaro. And we do the news every weekday. We might take a break for Family Day, but we'll see. But we hope that you like and subscribe and comment. How are you feeling about any of these stories? Is there anything you would like us to talk about? You can always join our Twitch that we do live, or you can join our Discord if you would like us to talk about any issues in particular. We're quite active and we're very opinionated, so feel free to drop in and ask us about literally anything, especially if it involves Canadian politics. All right, thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you tomorrow morning.